The torches cast dancing shadows across Elias Boone's weathered face as he stood on the porch, rifle gripped tight in his calloused hands. 6 men on horseback formed a half-circle before him, their leader Clayton Hutchins leaning forward in his saddle with barely contained rage. "Last chance for you, Boone. Give them up." Behind Elias, through the cabin's thin walls, he heard the terrified breathing of a woman and 5 children strangers he'd found starving behind his barn just 7 days ago. The same children whose laughter had filled his dead house for the first time in 15 years. His finger moved to the trigger. "Over my dead body." The town gathered at the fence line, silent witnesses holding their breath. Clayton's hand dropped to his gun. "Then we'll make that happen." But to understand why a broken man would die for a family he barely knew, we must go back 9 days. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments, along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Elias Boone had once been a different man. In the years before the fire, his ranch house rang with the sound of his daughter's laughter and his wife's gentle singing. Rebecca would hum while kneading bread, flour dusting her dark hair, while 8-year-old Emma chased chickens across the yard with her rag doll clutched in one hand. Those days felt like someone else's memories now. It was a November night when everything ended. Elias had ridden to town for supplies, planning to return by sunset. But a broken wagon wheel delayed him, and he'd spent the night in the livery stable, cursing his luck. He rode home at dawn to find his house reduced to blackened timber and ash. The lamp oil had spilled, they said. The fire spread too fast. Neighbors found Rebecca and Emma in what used to be the bedroom, their bodies intertwined as if Rebecca had been trying to shield their daughter to the very end. Elias fell to his knees in the ruins and didn't speak for 3 days. He found Rebecca's wedding ring in the ashes, warped and blackened by heat. He found Emma's doll, half melted. These he kept in a wooden box, locked away with the door to their bedroom. For 15 years, no one entered that room. For 15 years, Elias lived like a ghost in his own home. The town began calling him the Ghost Rancher. He rarely came to town, spoke to no one, let his cattle wander and his fields go fallow. At night, he sat in the dark and replayed that evening over and over if he'd just come home when planned. If he'd checked the lamps before leaving. If he'd been there to wake them when smoke filled the house. The guilt ate at him like a cancer. He deserved this loneliness, he told himself. He deserved to suffer. What Elias never told anyone was the full truth about his survival. 27 years earlier, he'd been a young soldier at Gettysburg, bleeding out in a cornfield while cannon fire shook the earth. A fellow Union soldier named Thomas Hutchins had dragged him to safety, wrapping his shattered leg with strips torn from his own shirt. "You got a family waiting. Eli," Thomas had said, his young face streaked with gunpowder and blood. "Get home to them." Elias had survived. He'd married Rebecca, had Emma, built his ranch. And Thomas, they'd lost touch after the war. Elias never learned what became of the boy who saved his life. Now, at 50 years old, Elias sat alone in his empty house each night, wondering if Thomas had made it home too, wondering if anyone had been there to save him when he needed it. The debt gnawed at him, a life saved, never repaid, until a September afternoon when everything changed. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as Elias walked toward the barn to check on his remaining horses. Drought had cracked the earth into a mosaic of parched clay, and what little grass remained crunched beneath his boots like old paper. He was considering selling off another horse just to afford feed when he heard it a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as wind. A child's whimper. Elias froze, his hand instinctively moving to the knife at his belt. Coyotes had been getting bolder, but this was no animal. He moved slowly around the corner of the barn, and what he saw stopped him cold. 5 children huddled against the weathered wood. Their mother collapsed beside them. The woman's face was hollow with starvation, her lips cracked and bleeding. Her dress hung in tatters, and her feet were wrapped in bloodied rags. But it was the children that struck him hardest. The oldest girl, no more than 10, had her arms wrapped around her siblings in a futile attempt at protection. 2 boys sat glassy-eyed beside her, too weak to move. A small girl clutched a corn-husked doll, her tiny frame trembling, and in the mother's arms lay a baby. Lips blue-tinged, chest rising and falling in shallow gasps. They looked like they'd been dead for days, yet somehow still clung to life. The mother's eyes fluttered open. When she saw Elias, terror flooded her face. She tried to pull the children closer, tried to shield them, but she had no strength left. Her mouth moved, forming words no sound could carry. For 5 seconds, Elias stood paralyzed. The oldest girl stared at him, with Emma's eyes that same mixture of fear and desperate hope. The baby's labored breathing echoed in his ears like the crackling of flames from 15 years ago. Not again. The thought crashed through him like thunder. Not again. "Come with me." His voice came out rough from disuse. The mother shook her head weakly, certain this was a trap. Some new cruelty in a world that had shown her nothing but cruelty. Elias knelt slowly, making himself small, non-threatening. He reached for the baby, and the mother's arms tightened reflexively. But she was too weak to hold on. As Elias lifted the child, so light it felt like holding air, he saw the mother's tears finally come hot and desperate and full of every prayer she had left. "You're safe now," he said, though he didn't know if he was lying. He gathered the smallest boy in his other arm, then turned toward the house he'd kept empty for so long. Behind him, the older children helped their mother stand. They stumbled forward like a line of wounded soldiers retreating from battle. Elias kicked open his front door for the first time in months. Dust motes swirled in the afternoon light. The house smelled of abandonment and old grief. But as he laid the baby on his bed and heard the other children shuffle inside, something shifted in the stale air. The ghost house began to breathe again. Within an hour, he had water boiling and was cutting potatoes into a thin soup. The children sat around his table that hadn't seen a meal in years, and watched him with wide, mistrustful eyes. When he placed bowls before them, they didn't move until their mother nodded permission. Then they ate like starving animals, which is exactly what they were. Elias stood back and watched them, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. The baby slept in his bed, color slowly returning to its cheeks. The mother wept quietly into her hands, her shoulders shaking with exhaustion and relief and the terrible weight of survival. That night, for the first time in 15 years, Elias Boone's house was full of life. And though he didn't know their names or their story, though he didn't know what morning would bring, he knew one thing with absolute certainty: he would not let them die. After the children fell asleep on blankets spread across the floor, the woman finally spoke. Her name was Miriam Hutchins, and the story she told in whispered fragments made Elias's blood run cold. Her husband Thomas had been a veteran of the war, she said. A good man who worked himself to exhaustion to provide for his family. But the lung sickness that plagued so many soldiers had caught up with him 8 months ago. He died in their bed, drowning in fluid, leaving Miriam with 5 children and $8 a month in veterans' pension. Thomas's family, his parents, and older brother Clayton had taken them in at first. Or so it seemed. The pension money went to the family coffers to help pay off debts on their failing ranch. Miriam cooked and cleaned and cared for her children in a back room of the Hutchins house. Grateful for the roof over their heads, even as Clayton's eyes grew colder and his parents' charity wore thin. Then came the accusation. $50 had gone missing from the family strongbox, and Clayton declared Miriam had stolen it. She swore she hadn't touched it, that she'd never even seen inside the box. But her word meant nothing against the Hutchins name. They gave her 1 hour to leave with her children and threatened to have her arrested if she spoke against them. What Miriam didn't say, what she couldn't bring herself to say yet, was that she had taken something. Not the $50 they accused her of, but the $8 Thomas had hidden in a book for her alone. Money meant for their children that his family would have seized along with everything else. This truth sat like a stone in her throat. She'd walked for 3 weeks, she told Elias, following the creek beds and avoiding towns where the Hutchins name might reach. The children ate wild berries and roots when they could find them. They drank from cattle troughs. When little Matthew grew too weak to walk, she'd carried him until her legs gave out. And then the older children took turns. They'd been sitting behind Elias's barn for 2 days, too frightened to approach the house, too weak to go any farther. They were waiting to die, she admitted, just waiting for it to finally be over. Elias listened to all this while staring into the dying fire. When she finished, he asked quietly, "Hutchins, Thomas Hutchins from Virginia." Miriam nodded, confused by the sudden tension in his voice. "Was he at Gettysburg?" "Yes." He never talked much about it. "But yes." Elias stood abruptly and walked to a trunk in the corner. He dug through old letters and papers until he found what he was looking for, a faded daguerreotype of himself as a young soldier, standing beside another man in Union blue. He brought it to Miriam. "Is that him?" She gasped, her fingers trembling as she touched the image. "That's Thomas. That's my Thomas. But how? He saved my life." Elias's voice cracked on the words. "I was bleeding out in a cornfield, and he dragged me to safety. Told me I had a family waiting. Told me to live for both of us." He looked at Miriam, at the sleeping children, and something ancient and unbreakable settled into place behind his eyes. "I owe him a debt I can never repay, but I can repay it to you." Miriam began to cry again. But these were different tears. "They'll come looking for us. Clayton won't let the pension money go. He needs it to pay off the bank. Let them come." "You don't understand. The Hutchins family has influence. They'll bring the sheriff. They'll say I'm a thief, that you're harboring a criminal." Elias walked to his gun cabinet and began checking his rifles, his movements calm and methodical. "Your husband saved my family once. Now I'll save his." He turned to face her. "I lost my wife and daughter 15 years ago to a fire. I wasn't here to protect them. I've lived every day since then wondering why I survived when they didn't." His voice dropped to barely a whisper. "Maybe this is why." Miriam stared at this strange man who'd opened his home to her dying children, who spoke of debts and purpose as if they were holy things. "What if they kill you? Then I die protecting something that matters." He handed her a key. This opens my bedroom. If trouble comes, you take the children in there and lock the door. You don't come out until I tell you it's safe. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm choosing. He looked toward the sleeping children. Hard times don't last. But hard people do. Your children are fighters. So are you. And now you have someone fighting with you. As dawn broke over the ranch, Elias stood on his porch and watched the road. He knew what was coming. The Hutchins family wouldn't let this stand. But for the first time in 15 years, Elias Boone had a reason to keep standing. He had a debt to repay, a family to protect, and perhaps, just perhaps, a way to forgive himself for the family he'd failed to save. The ghost had remembered how to be a man. By the second morning, smoke from Elias's chimney had drawn attention. The delivery boy who brought supplies once a month arrived to find children's voices drifting from the ghost rancher's house, a sound no one had heard there in over a decade. By afternoon, the whispers had started in town. At the general store, women clutched their packages and speculated in hushed tones. A strange woman and 5 children, Mrs. O'Brien said, her voice dripping with disapproval. Living under his roof with no chaperone, no propriety. Others wondered if Elias had finally lost his mind to grief. A few, very few, simply hoped the lonely man had found some measure of peace. The talk reached Sheriff Morgan by evening. He was a fair man, weathered by years of keeping order in a town that didn't always want it kept. He'd known Elias before the fire, remembered him as decent and hard-working. But decent men did strange things when grief ate at them long enough. Morgan made a note to ride out to the Boone Ranch soon, just to make sure everything was as it should be. The rumors reached the Hutchins family even faster. On the 3rd day, Clayton Hutchins rode up to Elias's property with 2 ranch hands flanking him. Elias was mending fence when he heard the horses. He set down his tools slowly, wiped his hands on his pants, and walked to meet them. Clayton was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with eyes that calculated the value of everything they touched. He sat his horse like he owned not just the animal, but the ground beneath it. "Mr. Boone," he said, his voice carrying false courtesy, "I believe you have something that belongs to my family." "Get off my land." Clayton's smile didn't waver. "Now, that's not very neighborly. I'm just here for my sister-in-law and her children." Poor woman ran off in her grief. Not thinking straight. We're worried sick about her. She's not going anywhere. "Mr. Boone, I don't think you understand the situation. Miriam stole money from our family. We have documentation. We're her only living relatives, and those children need proper care." He leaned forward in his saddle. "You're harboring a thief and keeping children from their lawful guardians. That's a crime." Elias's hand moved to rest on the rifle, leaning against the fence post. "Here's what I understand. A widow and 5 starving children showed up on my property half dead. I fed them. I gave them shelter. That's not a crime, that's being a Christian. We can go to the sheriff, then go. But until he shows me papers that say otherwise, this family is under my protection." Elias picked up his rifle, not pointing it but making its presence clear. "And one more thing. Hutchins, I knew your brother Thomas. He saved my life at Gettysburg. I owe him a debt I can never fully repay. But I can protect his widow and children from men who'd let them starve over a few dollars." Clayton's face darkened. For a moment, violence hung in the air between them, like heat shimmer. Then Clayton pulled his horse's head around. "You're making a mistake. Boone, a big one. We'll be back with the law." "I'll be waiting." as the three riders disappeared down the road. Elias felt his hands begin to shake. He'd just made an enemy of one of the most influential families in the county. But when he turned back toward the house and saw Miriam watching from the window, Sarah beside her, he knew he'd do it again. That evening, an unexpected visitor arrived. Dr. Miller was an old man, bent by age but sharp of mind and eye. He'd been the only doctor in town for 40 years and had brought most of its children into the world, including Emma Boone. He knocked on Elias's door with his black bag in hand. "Heard you have children here who might need looking at," he said simply. Elias let him in. Dr. Miller examined each child thoroughly, his weathered hands gentle as he checked their throats, listened to their hearts, looked at the bottoms of their feet torn raw from walking. He spent the longest time with baby Matthew, whose breathing still came shallow and labored. When he finished, he sat at the table with Elias and Miriam. Severe malnutrition, dehydration, exhaustion. The baby has fluid in his lungs, pneumonia. Most likely. Another week without help, and you'd have been burying at least 2 of them. He looked at Miriam with kind eyes. "You got them here just in time, ma'am." "How much do we owe you?" Miriam asked, knowing she had nothing to pay with. "Nothing." Dr. Miller stood, collecting his bag. "But I'll be back tomorrow to check on the little one." He paused at the door, looking at Elias. "My son died at Shiloh. Served with Thomas Hutchins. Thomas wrote me after. Told me my boy died brave. I never forgot that kindness." He put on his hat. "The Hutchins family has changed since Thomas passed. Debt and desperation make people cruel. But you're doing right by his widow. Boone, I'll stand with you if it comes to that." After he left, Elias sat in the dark kitchen, listening to the sounds of sleeping children in his house. The little ones breathed easier now, their bellies full for the 3rd night in a row. He thought about Thomas Hutchins bleeding in that cornfield, about Rebecca and Emma burning while he slept in town, about debts that could never be fully repaid, and chances that came disguised as catastrophe. Still, waters run deep. His father used to say, Elias had been still for 15 years, his grief a deep well with no bottom. But now that well was filling with something else, purpose, maybe, or the simple human need to protect something precious. Tomorrow Clayton would likely return with the sheriff. Tomorrow the real fight would begin. But tonight, Elias Boone sat in his once empty house and listened to children breathe. And for the first time since the fire, he didn't feel like a ghost. He felt like a man with something worth fighting for. Sheriff Morgan arrived on the 5th morning with papers in his saddlebag and reluctance in his eyes. Clayton Hutchins rode beside him, satisfaction written across his face like a brand. Behind them came a clerk from the county office, there to witness whatever was about to unfold. Elias met them on his porch, rifle across his lap. He didn't stand. "Eli," Morgan said, dismounting slowly. "Don't make this harder than it needs to be. What have you got there?" Sheriff Morgan pulled out the documents, his jaw tight. "Complaint filed by Clayton Hutchins. Says his sister-in-law, Miriam Hutchins, stole $50 from the family home. Says you're harboring a known thief. Judge signed a writ giving the Hutchins family temporary custody of the children pending investigation." He met Elias's eyes. "I have to serve this, Eli. It's the law. That woman stole from us." Clayton interjected, his voice loud enough to carry. "Took money that belonged to my family, money we need to keep our ranch. Then she ran off with children who should be in our care, getting proper upbringing." Elias stood slowly. "How much time do I have?" "7 days," Morgan said. "If evidence can be brought forward to dispute the claim, the judge will hear it. But Eli, if you resist this writ, I'll have no choice but to arrest you." 7 days. Elias looked past the sheriff to Clayton. "That's plenty of time to find out the truth." Clayton's smile was thin and sharp. "There is no other truth. Boone, she's a thief, and those children deserve better than living with a hermit and a criminal. After 7 days, we're taking them home where they belong." "Over my dead body?" "That can be arranged," Clayton said quietly. Sheriff Morgan stepped between them. "That's enough. Eli, you have until next week. Use the time wisely. Clayton, you've filed your complaint now. Let the law work." He handed Elias the papers. "Don't do anything stupid, old friend. I'd hate to have to put you in chains." After they left, Elias sat on his porch steps and read every word of the legal documents twice. The language was cold and bureaucratic, reducing Miriam's desperation to theft and his compassion to criminal harboring. But it was the date that caught his eye. 7 days from now would be the anniversary of the fire that killed Rebecca and Emma. Some kind of dark poetry in that, he thought. A chance to save a family on the exact day he'd failed to save his own. That afternoon, while Miriam kept the children occupied inside, Elias rode to town. He needed information, allies, anything that might help when the week ran out. He found Dr. Miller at his office and told him about the writ. 7 days isn't much time, the doctor said, setting down his glasses. "What will you do?" "Fight, but I need to know what I'm fighting against." Elias leaned forward. "You said you knew Thomas. What about his family?" Dr. Miller sighed heavily. "The Hutchins used to be decent people, but they mortgaged their ranch heavy about 5 years back, trying to expand. Then drought hit. Cattle died. Crops failed. They're in debt to the bank for over $200, a fortune they don't have. That veteran's pension Miriam receives, $8 a month, adds up. Over a year. That's nearly $100. In a few years, it could save their ranch. So this isn't about justice. It's about money. It's always about money, Eli, or power, which is the same thing." Dr. Miller stood and walked to his window, looking out at the street. "But there's something else you should know. Clayton Hutchins has a reputation. He drinks heavy, gets mean when he does. There were rumors after Thomas died about Clayton paying too much attention to Miriam, about her locking her door at night. Nothing proven, mind you. Just whispers." A cold fury settled into Elias's chest. She never said anything about that. "Would you, in her position, a widow with no money, dependent on her husband's family, nowhere else to go?" Dr. Miller turned back to him. "Some sins we keep silent about because speaking them aloud would destroy whatever fragile safety we've managed to build." That night, as Elias sat by the fire, Miriam came to him after the children were asleep. She'd been quiet all day, her face drawn with worry. "I need to tell you something," she said. "Something I should have said from the beginning." Elias waited. "I did take money. Not $50, I never touched that. But Thomas had hidden $8 in a book. Money he'd saved from his pension before he got too sick to hide it anymore. He told me it was for the children, that his family couldn't know about it." Her hands twisted in her lap. "When they threw us out, I took it. I used it to buy food the first few days we were on the road. It's gone now. Spent keeping my babies alive." She looked up at him, eyes bright with unshed tears. So Clayton's not entirely wrong. I am a thief. I stole from the Hutchins family. You took what your husband meant for you to have. The law won't see it that way. Then the law's a fool. Elias leaned forward, his voice intense. You took money your husband saved for his children and used it to feed those children. That's not theft, that's being a mother. Any judge with sense will see that. And if they don't? Elias didn't answer immediately. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Somewhere in the darkness, a coyote howled. Finally, he said, then we'll deal with that when it comes. But Miriam, I need you to trust me. Can you do that? She studied his face, this strange, solitary man who'd taken them in, who spoke of debts and honor like they were tangible things you could hold in your hands. Everything in her life had taught her that men couldn't be trusted, that kindness always came with a price. But there was something in Elias Boone's eyes that reminded her of Thomas, of the man who'd loved her truly and died too young. Yes, she said. I trust you. On the 6th day, violence came like a thief in the night. Elias woke to the smell of smoke and the sound of horses. He grabbed his rifle and ran outside to find the corner of his barn ablaze, flames licking up the dry wood. Dark figures on horseback watched from the road, backlit by the fire. For one terrible moment, Elias was frozen. He was 25 years in the past, staring at his house burning with his family inside. Unable to move, unable to breathe, unable to do anything but watch everything he loved turn to ash. Then a child's voice cut through his paralysis. Mr. Boone, help. It was Sarah, standing in the doorway with her siblings behind her, their faces illuminated by the flames. And just like that, Elias could move again. He ran for the water pump, filled buckets, threw them at the flames. Dr. Miller, who'd taken to sleeping in his buggy nearby in case of trouble, appeared with more water. Together they fought the fire while the horsemen watched. It took an hour to put it out. The damage was contained to one corner of the barn, but the message was clear. We can reach you. We can hurt you. Give up before we burn more than wood. As dawn broke, Elias stood in the ashes, his hands blistered and black with soot. He was shaking, not from fear, but from rage and from the memories that threatened to pull him under. Sarah approached slowly and slipped her small hand into his. You saved us, she said simply. Elias looked down at her, this child who looked so much like Emma, and felt something shift inside him. He hadn't been there to save his own daughter, but he was here now. And this time, he wouldn't fail. Go back inside, he told her gently. Tell your mama everything's fine. One more day until the deadline. One more day to find a way to keep this family together. Or to decide how far he was willing to go to protect them. As the sun rose over his scarred property, Elias Boone made his choice. He'd already lost everything once. He had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. Let them come. The knock came in the late afternoon of the 6th day. Soft and hesitant. Elias opened the door to find a black man standing on his porch, hat in his weathered hands, eyes darting nervously toward the road. He was maybe 40 years old, thin from hard labor, with the careful posture of someone who'd learned to make himself small. Mr. Boone, my name's Ezekiel Washington. I worked for the Hutchins family. He swallowed hard. I got something I need to say before it's too late. Elias let him in. Miriam stood when she saw Ezekiel, her face going white. Zeke, what are you? I'm sorry, ma'am. I should have spoken sooner, should have done it a long time ago. But I was scared. Still am. He turned to Elias. I know what happened to Mrs. Hutchins. I know why she ran, and I can't keep quiet no more. They sat at the table, and Ezekiel told them what he'd witnessed, how after Thomas died, Clayton had started drinking heavier, how he'd watched Miriam with eyes that made Ezekiel's skin crawl, how one night, about a month after the funeral, Ezekiel had been working late in the barn when he heard a scream from the house. I ran inside, Ezekiel said, his voice shaking. Found Mr. Clayton in the hallway outside Mrs. Miriam's room. She was crying. Her dress was torn. He was drunk, could barely stand. When he saw me, he said I'd better forget what I saw if I knew what was good for me. Miriam had her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Elias felt something dark and cold settle in his gut. I went to old Mrs. Hutchins, told her what happened. Ezekiel continued. She said I was mistaken, said her son would never do such a thing. Told me if I spread lies about the family, I'd hang from a tree before sunrise. He looked at Miriam with anguished eyes. I'm sorry, ma'am. I was a coward. I got a wife and daughter of my own. I was scared. It's not your fault, Miriam whispered, but her hands were shaking so badly she had to clasp them together. Elias stood, paced to the window, his mind working through the implications. Will you testify in front of the sheriff, in front of a judge if it comes to that? That's why I'm here. But Mr. Boone, you gotta understand I'm a black man accusing a white man of a crime against a white woman. Even with the war over, even with all the laws they passed. You know how this could end for me. I know. Elias turned to face him. And I'll protect you, whatever it takes. You can't protect me from a lynch mob. I can try. Ezekiel studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Then I'll do it, because I got a daughter. And if something like this happened to her, I'd want someone to stand up, even if it was dangerous, even if it was a black man's word against a white man's. After Ezekiel left, Elias sat with Miriam in the gathering darkness. The children were asleep, and the house was quiet save for the crackling of the fire. Finally, Miriam spoke. There's more you need to know. About Matthew. Elias waited, though something in him already knew what was coming. Thomas died 8 months ago. Matthew is 2 years old. She said it flatly, without emotion, as if she'd rehearsed these words 1,000 times. You can do the arithmetic? The silence stretched between them. Elias felt his chest tighten, felt rage and pity and horror warring inside him. Clayton, he said. It wasn't a question. I never wanted him. Miriam's voice broke. I loved my husband. I was faithful to Thomas until the day he died and every day after. But Clayton came to my room one night, drunk and angry about money, about losing the ranch, about his brother dying and leaving him with all the burden. I fought him. I did. But he was stronger, and there was no one to help me. The old Mrs. Hutchins heard. She had to have heard. But she never came. Why didn't you tell anyone? Who would believe me, a poor widow against the Hutchins name? They'd say I was lying, that I'd seduced him, that I was trying to get money out of shame. And they threatened to take my other children if I spoke. Said they'd prove I was an unfit mother, that I couldn't be trusted. So I stayed silent. I carried that baby in silence, gave birth to him in silence, and loved him in silence because none of what happened was his fault. She looked at Elias with eyes that had seen too much. When I ran, Clayton told everyone Matthew proved I'd been unfaithful to Thomas, that I dishonored his brother's memory. He's using my own child, his own child, as evidence against me. And the worst part is, people will believe him. They'll say a woman who would betray her dying husband would certainly steal money. Elias knelt beside her chair. Matthew is your son. How he came into the world doesn't change that. And anyone who'd use a child as a weapon is a man without honor. Tomorrow the sheriff comes. They'll take my children. They'll give them to Clayton, and I'll never see them again. And Matthew, her voice broke entirely. He'll be raised by the man who, she couldn't finish. No, Elias took her hands. That's not going to happen. How can you stop it? You have Zeke's testimony, but a black man's word against Clayton's family and their money and their influence. This is how the world works. Elias, men like Clayton win. Men like you and Zeke. People like me, we just survive the best we can. Sometimes, Elias said quietly, one man standing up is enough to make others stand too. We're not alone in this. Dr. Miller's with us. The sheriff's a fair man, even if he's bound by law. And tomorrow, when Clayton comes, he's going to find out that some things are worth fighting for, even if you lose. He stood and walked to his gun cabinet, began checking his rifles. Miriam watched him with a mixture of hope and despair. You could die tomorrow. I died 15 years ago when my family burned. What I've been doing since then is just haunting my own life. He turned to her. Your husband saved me once. Gave me a second chance I didn't know what to do with. Maybe this is what I was meant to do with it. Maybe Thomas knew somehow that I'd be here when his family needed saving. That's not how the world works. Maybe not. But it's how I choose to see it. He sat back down across from her. Miriam, I need you to understand something. Tomorrow, if things go wrong, I need you to take the children and run. Don't wait. Don't look back. Dr. Miller will help you get to the next county. You start over. No. Her voice was firm. I'm tired of running. I'm tired of being silent. If you're going to stand and fight, then so am I. Not with guns, but with the truth. I'll tell everyone what happened. What Clayton did. I'll say it in front of the whole town if I have to. They might not believe you. Then at least I'll have said it. At least my children will know their mother tried. She met his eyes. You've given us hope, Elias. You've given us a home. You've shown my children that there are good men in the world, men who keep their word and protect the weak. Whatever happens tomorrow, we've already won something precious. We've won back our dignity. Later that night, Miriam went to check on the children one last time. Matthew was curled against Sarah, his thumb in his mouth. Jacob had his arm around Ruth. Samuel clutched the old doll that had belonged to Emma Boone. They looked peaceful, fed and warm and safe perhaps for the last time. She felt Elias come to stand beside her in the doorway. I won't let them take your children, he said softly. I don't know how yet, but I won't. Why? Miriam asked. Why would you risk everything for us? We're nothing to you. Elias was quiet for a long moment. 15 years ago, I came home to ashes. I found my wife and daughter dead because I wasn't there to save them. I've lived every day since wondering why I survived. Why Thomas pulled me out of that cornfield. Why I got to live when Rebecca and Emma died. He paused. Maybe this is why. Maybe I survived so I could be here now. To stand between your family and the people trying to destroy it. Maybe this is how I pay back the debt not to Thomas, but to the universe that let me live. That's a heavy burden to carry. I've been carrying worse for 15 years. At least this burden has purpose. Miriam turned to him in the darkness. If we survive tomorrow, if by some miracle we make it through, I want you to know you've already saved us. Not just from starvation, but from despair. You've shown my children that kindness still exists in this world. That's worth more than all the money the Hutchins family is fighting over. We'll survive, Elias said with more confidence than he felt. We have to. But as he walked back to his room and loaded his rifles, as he wrote a short will leaving his property to Miriam should he fall, as he sat by the window and watched the road for the violence he knew was coming, Elias Boone understood that some battles couldn't be won with bullets. Some battles required something harder faith that doing the right thing mattered, even if it cost you everything. Tomorrow, the seventh day, would dawn. Tomorrow, Clayton Hutchins would come with the law behind him. And tomorrow, Elias would stand in his doorway with a rifle in his hands and a family behind him, and discover whether redemption was real or just another ghost story we tell ourselves to make peace with the dark. Dawn broke on the seventh day with the sky the color of old bruises. Elias stood on his porch, watching the road, his rifle loaded and ready. Behind him, Dr. Miller and Ezekiel Washington waited, both men having arrived before sunrise. Inside the house, Miriam kept the children calm, though Sarah's eyes kept darting to the windows. Sheriff Morgan arrived first, alone and on horseback. He dismounted slowly, his face grim. Eli, I need you to listen carefully. I spent yesterday investigating, talked to people, looked at records, asked questions. He pulled papers from his saddlebag. Clayton Hutchins is in debt to the bank for $230. His ranch is going to auction in 3 months unless he can pay. That veteran's pension. It's the only steady money his family has access to. So this is about money. Just like we thought. It's always about money. But there's more. Morgan glanced at Ezekiel. I spoke with some other folks who worked for the Hutchins family. Quietly. So Clayton wouldn't know. 2 other people besides Ezekiel saw signs of trouble. A cook who heard Miriam crying at night. A ranch hand who noticed how she started locking her door after Thomas died. How she'd flinch when Clayton walked by. He met Elias's eyes. I believe her story. Eli. Problem is, belief isn't the same as proof. Not in a court of law. You have my testimony, Ezekiel said quietly. Morgan turned to him with respect, but also sadness. I know, and I'll put it on record. But Ezekiel, you know how juries see things. A black man's word against a white family with influence. He didn't need to finish. So what are you saying? Elias asked. That we just hand those children over to a man who assaulted their mother? I'm saying the law has limits, but I'm also saying I'm not leaving here until we figure something out that doesn't end with you in a grave or a jail cell. Morgan looked down the road. Clayton's coming. Probably bringing enough men to intimidate you into compliance. But Eli, if you shoot first, even in defense, they'll hang you. The law will have no choice. Then what do? You let me handle it. I'm still the law here. And until a judge says otherwise, I decide who's in the right. Morgan's jaw tightened. But there's something else you need to know. I sent word to the circuit judge about this case. Laid out what I'd learned. He agreed to come early. He should be here within the hour. If we can hold Clayton off until then, We might get a fair hearing instead of a mob. Elias felt a small flicker of hope. You did that. I did. Because sometimes the law needs time to catch up to justice. Morgan positioned himself in front of Elias. Now here's what's going to happen. You're going to put that rifle down and let me do my job. Understood? Before Elias could answer, horses appeared on the horizon. 6 men rode toward the ranch, Clayton at their head. But behind them came something worse, townspeople, drawn by rumors of confrontation, hungry for drama. 30 or 40 people gathered at the fence line, watching and waiting to see which way the wind would blow. Clayton reined up hard, his eyes blazing with triumph. Time's up. Boone, Sheriff, you have your orders. Remove that woman and those children from this property. Now hold on, Morgan said. We're not waiting on anything. The writ says 7 days. 7 days are done. Clayton's gaze swept the small group on the porch. And what's this? The hermit's got himself an army, an old doctor and a black field hand. He laughed, and his men joined in. Boone, you're even more pathetic than I thought. Elias's hand tightened on his rifle, but Morgan stepped forward. Clayton, I'm ordering you to wait. Judge Hendricks is on his way. He'll hear both sides and make a decision. There's nothing to hear. She's a thief. I have documents. You have allegations. That's different from proof. Clayton's horse danced sideways, sensing its rider's anger. Are you refusing to enforce a legal writ, Sheriff? Because that sounds like dereliction of duty. I'm saying we wait for the judge, and I'm saying we're done waiting. Clayton turned to his men. Go in there and bring out that woman and the children. Use force if necessary. The men dismounted and started forward. Elias raised his rifle. Dr. Miller and Ezekiel stood firm beside him. The crowd at the fence murmured nervously. Then a voice cut through the tension like a knife. Stop! Everyone turned. An old woman stood at the edge of the crowd, her face pale but resolute. Eleanor Hutchins, Clayton's mother, walked slowly toward her son. She was dressed in black, as she had been since Thomas died, and she carried herself with the rigid dignity of old Virginia families. Mother, Clayton's voice was uncertain. What are you doing here? I'm doing what I should have done months ago. She looked at him, and in her eyes was a sorrow so deep it seemed bottomless. I'm telling the truth. The crowd fell silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Eleanor Hutchins turned to face the gathered townspeople. My son Thomas was a good man. He loved his wife. He loved his children. And he died with honor. Her voice shook but didn't break. My son Clayton is not a good man. He has not acted with honor. Mother, don't be silent. The command in her voice made Clayton flinch. I have been silent too long. I have let fear and pride keep me from speaking. And that silence has poisoned everything. She looked at Sheriff Morgan. The night my son Thomas died, I heard Miriam weeping in her room. I heard her lock her door. 1 month later, I heard her scream. I heard Clayton in the hallway, drunk and angry. I knew what he'd done. And I did nothing. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. Clayton's face went from red to white. You don't know what you're saying. You're confused. I am old, Clayton. But I am not confused. I know exactly what I'm saying. She turned to Miriam, who had stepped out onto the porch, tears streaming down her face. I know Matthew is not my grandson by Thomas. I know how that child came to be, and I know that when you tried to tell me, I threatened you into silence. I told you no one would believe you. I told you I would take your other children if you spoke against this family." Eleanor's voice broke on the last words. But she continued, "I did this to protect the Hutchins name, to protect our position in society, to protect my son from consequences he had earned." She looked at Clayton with infinite sadness. But there is no honor in protecting evil. There is no dignity in silencing victims. I have betrayed every value my husband and I taught our sons. I have betrayed the memory of Thomas, who would be ashamed of what we've become. "Mother, please," Clayton's voice was desperate now. "Miriam Hutchins is not a thief. The money she took was saved by my son Thomas specifically for his children. I saw him hide it in that book. I heard him tell her it was hers if anything happened to him." Eleanor's hands trembled. The $50 Clayton claims she stole, it never existed. He invented that theft to have grounds to take the children, to claim the pension money we need to save our failing ranch. She turned back to the crowd. "I am a mother who has failed her children. I am a woman who has betrayed another woman in her darkest hour. I am guilty of cowardice and cruelty, but I will not stand silent any longer while my son destroys what remains of our family's honor." Clayton's men had backed away, unwilling to be part of whatever was unfolding. Clayton himself sat frozen on his horse, his face a mask of rage and humiliation. Sheriff Morgan stepped forward. "Mrs. Hutchins, are you willing to make this testimony official in front of a judge?" "I am." "Then Clayton Hutchins, I'm placing you under arrest for assault, fraud, and attempted kidnapping. Get off that horse. You can't do this." But Clayton's voice had lost its certainty. You're under arrest." Morgan's hand moved to his gun. "Don't make me ask twice." The fight went out of Clayton all at once. He dismounted slowly, and Morgan pulled his arms behind his back to bind them. As he was led away, Clayton looked back at his mother one last time. "You've destroyed us. You've destroyed everything." "No," Eleanor said quietly. "You destroyed us. I'm just finally admitting it." The crowd began to disperse, murmuring among themselves. Some looked at Elias with new respect. Others looked ashamed that they'd come expecting violence and entertainment. Dr. Miller put a hand on Elias's shoulder. Ezekiel Washington exhaled a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. Miriam walked slowly down the porch steps toward Eleanor Hutchins. The two women stood facing each other, one young and devastated, one old and broken by conscience. "Why?" Miriam asked. "Why now? After all this time?" "Because I looked in the mirror this morning and didn't recognize the woman I saw. Because my son Thomas deserved better from me. Because those children deserve better." Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "And because I have one son in the grave, and I was about to lose the other to evil. At least this way. Perhaps Clayton has a chance to become something better than what he is. Perhaps prison will save his soul where my silence was damning it. I don't know if I can forgive you. I don't expect you to. I don't forgive myself." Eleanor looked past Miriam to the children watching from the doorway. "But perhaps someday, when they're grown, you might tell them their grandmother finally found the courage to do the right thing. Even if it was too late." She turned and walked away, her back straight, her head high, a woman who'd lost everything, but gained back her soul. Judge Hendricks arrived an hour later to find the crisis resolved. He took statements, reviewed evidence, and made his ruling before sunset. Miriam Hutchins would retain full custody of her children. The veteran's pension would remain hers, Clayton Hutchins would stand trial for assault, and the theft charges against Miriam were dismissed. As the judge rode away, Elias sat on his porch steps, suddenly exhausted. The rifle lay across his lap, unfired. No one had died. No blood had been spilled. And somehow, against all odds, justice had been done. Miriam sat down beside him. "You saved us. Your mother-in-law saved you. I just stood here with a gun." "No. You gave her time. You gave her a reason. If you hadn't fought, if you'd given up, she never would have found the courage to speak." Miriam leaned her head against his shoulder. "Thank you, Elias Boone. Thank you for standing between us and the darkness." Inside the house, the children laughed at something Dr. Miller said. The sound drifted out through the open windows, and Elias closed his eyes and let it wash over him. For 15 years, his house had been silent. For 15 years, he'd lived with ghosts and guilt. But today, life had won. Today, a family had been saved. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough to balance the scales of the family he'd failed to save all those years ago. The ghost rancher was finally at peace. 2 weeks after the confrontation, Elias stood in the doorway of the bedroom he'd kept locked for 15 years. Miriam had asked his permission to clean it, to make it ready for Sarah and Ruth to share. He'd agreed. But now, watching her work, he felt 15 years of grief pressing against his chest like a physical weight. She handled Rebecca's things with reverence, folding the dresses that still hung in the wardrobe, carefully wrapping the hair combs and jewelry in cloth. When she found Emma's toys in the trunk at the foot of the bed, she brought them to Elias with tears in her eyes. "These should go to the children," she said softly. "Your daughter would want them to be loved, not locked away in the dark." Elias nodded, unable to speak. That afternoon, he watched Ruth play with Emma's doll, watched Samuel stack the wooden blocks Emma had once stacked. The sight hurt, but it was a clean hurt, like lancing a wound that had festered too long. The pain meant healing was possible. The trial lasted 3 days. Clayton Hutchins sat silent and sullen, while witness after witness testified. Ezekiel Washington took the stand with quiet dignity and told what he'd seen. Dr. Miller presented his medical examination of Miriam, showing old bruises and signs of violence. Eleanor Hutchins testified again, her voice steady, her eyes never leaving her son's face. Clayton was sentenced to 12 years in prison as they led him away. He looked back once at his mother. She didn't turn away, but neither did she reach out. Some distances couldn't be bridged. Some betrayals couldn't be undone. The Hutchins ranch was sold at auction. The bank recouped its losses. Eleanor moved to live with a sister in another county, carrying with her the weight of choices made and unmade. Before she left, she came one last time to Elias's ranch. "I don't expect forgiveness," she told Miriam, "but I hope someday you might find peace. You loved my son Thomas, and he loved you. That was real. Hold on to that, not the darkness that came after." Miriam watched her leave, then turned to Elias. "Do you think people can change? Really change? Not just say the words, but actually become different?" "I think Eleanor Hutchins sacrificed everything to tell the truth. I think that takes a kind of courage most people never find." He paused. "And I think I'm standing here with a house full of children instead of sitting alone with ghosts. So yes, I believe people can change." And 1 month after the trial, on a Sunday morning with autumn gold in the trees, something shifted in the house. Miriam was making breakfast when Elias came to the kitchen and said quietly, "I'd like to take you all to visit Rebecca and Emma today. To the cemetery. I think it's time they met." The children dressed in their best clothes, hand-me-downs from church donations, but clean and mended with care. They rode to town in Elias's wagon, and he led them to 2 headstones under an oak tree. Rebecca Boone. The first stone read, "Beloved wife and mother." The second was smaller, "Emma Boone. Age 8. Forever in our hearts." Sarah placed wildflowers on the graves without being asked. Jacob stood with his hands clasped, trying to look grown up. Ruth whispered, "Are they angels now, Matthew?" Too young to understand death. Chased a butterfly between the headstones. Elias knelt and touched Rebecca's stone. "I've brought people for you to meet," he said aloud, not caring who heard. "This is Miriam, and these are her children. They needed help, and I gave it. I hope you're proud of that. I hope you understand why I'm doing this." Miriam knelt beside him. "I'll never try to replace her," she said quietly. "I know what it means to lose someone you love. But Elias, we can't live forever in the past. Thomas wouldn't want that for me. Rebecca wouldn't want it for you. I know." He stood slowly, turning to face her. "I've been thinking about something, about the future. The children need stability, a real home, a family. And He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I've been alone long enough. I'm not talking about romance or passion. I'm talking about partnership. About 2 people who've both lost everything building something new together." Miriam studied his face. "Are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you consider staying permanently as my wife, not because you have nowhere else to go, but because this could be home, real home, for all of us. Elias, I'm damaged. I'm broken in ways I'm not sure can be fixed. So am I, but maybe broken things can support each other. Maybe that's enough." He took her hand. "I can't promise love like you had with Thomas, but I can promise respect, protection, partnership. I can promise your children will have a father who'll stand between them and every danger in this world. And I can promise you'll never be alone again." Miriam looked at the children playing among the headstones, then back at this strange, wounded man who'd saved them. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I'll marry you." They were wed 3 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church. Dr. Miller stood as witness. Sheriff Morgan attended, along with Ezekiel Washington and his family. It wasn't a large gathering, but it was real people who'd stood with them when standing was difficult. Sarah served as a flower girl, wearing a dress altered from one of Rebecca's that Elias had given permission to remake. When the preacher asked if anyone objected, the silence was complete. And when Elias and Miriam exchanged rings, his old wedding band, and a simple silver ring Dr. Miller had helped him buy something in the church, felt settled, like a story finding its proper ending. The first year passed in a rhythm of healing. The children grew stronger, their faces filling out, their nightmares becoming less frequent. Sarah learned to read beyond simple words, devouring every book Elias could find. Jacob took to ranch work like he'd been born to it. Ruth collected every injured animal she found and nursed them back to health. Samuel drew pictures on every scrap of paper, his talent evident even at 4 years old. and Matthew, too young to remember the hardship, grew up knowing only love and safety. Elias found himself teaching Jacob to mend fences and break horses, the same lessons his own father had taught him. He found himself checking Sarah's homework and listening to Ruth's elaborate stories about the birds and rabbits she'd befriended. He found himself being called Papa by 5 children who weren't his by blood, but were his in every way that mattered. Miriam found peace in routine cooking, mending, managing the household that had once been a mausoleum. She and Elias shared a bed, but gave each other space, understanding that intimacy came in many forms, and not all of them required passion. They became partners in the truest sense. 2 people working toward a common goal, giving these children a life worth living. On the anniversary of Rebecca and Emma's deaths, Elias woke before dawn, as he always had. But this time, when he walked outside, he found Miriam already there, holding 2 cups of coffee. "I thought you might want company today," she said. They sat together on the porch steps, watching the sunrise. "Do you think they'd approve?" Elias asked. "Rebecca and Thomas, what we've built here. I think they're watching over us. I think they're grateful their loved ones found each other." She leaned against him. "This isn't the life either of us planned, but it's a good life. Elias, it's enough. It's more than enough. It's everything." 5 years slipped by like water, each season bringing new growth. The ranch prospered as Elias put his energy back into the land. The children transformed from starving waifs into healthy young people with dreams and ambitions. Sarah, at 15, became the youngest teacher in the county school, her gift for learning matched by her patience in teaching others. Jacob, at 13, ran the ranch as capably as any grown man. Ruth, at 11, announced she wanted to be a veterinarian, a profession almost unheard of for women, but one she pursued with fierce determination. Samuel, at 9, won prizes for his artwork, and Matthew, at 7, grew up never knowing the darkness of his origin, loved equally by everyone who knew him. One autumn evening, Elias sat on his porch watching the children play in the yard. Miriam came out to join him, her hair now streaked with early gray, her face peaceful in a way it hadn't been when she'd first arrived. "Do you have regrets?" she asked. "About how your life turned out?" Elias considered the question carefully. "I regret that Rebecca and Emma died. I'll carry that grief until I die. But I don't regret what came after. I don't regret opening my door that September afternoon. I don't regret standing up to Clayton. I don't regret making a family with you and these children." He smiled. "Sometimes I think Thomas knew, somehow, when he saved my life at Gettysburg. He knew I'd be here when his family needed saving. Like it was all meant to be. That's a beautiful thought. It helps make sense of the senseless." He took her hand. "Thank you, Miriam, for trusting me, for staying, for making this house a home again. Thank you for giving us a chance, for showing my children that good men exist in the world, for being the father they needed." She paused. "And for being the friend I needed, even when I didn't know it." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set and the children's laughter filled the air. In the distance, smoke rose from the chimney of the house that had once been a tomb. Now it was alive with voices and warmth and the messy, beautiful chaos of family. Years later, when Elias and Miriam were both gone to dust, their children would gather at their graves and remember. They would remember the man who'd stood against injustice with a rifle in his hands and courage in his heart. They would remember the woman who'd walked through hell to save her babies. They would remember that family wasn't just blood, but choice, commitment, and the willingness to stand between those you love and the darkness that seeks to swallow them. And they would pass those stories to their own children, ensuring that the legend of Elias Boone, the ghost who became a man, the hermit who became a father, the broken soul who found redemption in protecting the broken, would live on long after the ranch had crumbled and the memories had faded. Some stories deserve to be immortal. This was one of them. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone isn't money or possessions, but simply the courage to stand beside them when the whole world turns away. Elias Boone found redemption not by erasing his past, but by honoring it through action. He couldn't bring back Rebecca and Emma, but he could save Thomas's family. He couldn't undo 15 years of grief, but he could choose purpose over paralysis. His story reminds us that it's never too late to open our doors, our hearts, and our lives to those who need us most. Family isn't defined by blood alone, but by who shows up when times are darkest, who stays when leaving would be easier, who fights when others walk away. Every day we face choices between comfort and courage, between silence and speaking truth, between protecting ourselves and protecting others. Elias chose courage. Eleanor Hutchins chose truth. Ezekiel Washington chose justice despite the risk. And in their choices, a broken family found wholeness, and a haunted man found peace. The question isn't whether we'll face these moments, but whether we'll have the strength to choose right when they come. What would you have done in Elias's place? Have you ever had to choose between safety and doing what's right? Share your thoughts below, because your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.